Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Sharon had always believed that secrets were temporary shadows, dark enough to frighten you, but never strong enough to last forever. Yet on the night everything spiraled beyond control, those shadows closed around her like a suffocating fog, pushing her toward a confession she had prayed she'd never have to make. The rain hammered against the windows of the Newman Ranch as if it knew a tragedy was unfolding inside, and Sharon felt every drop like a countdown. Nick stood before her, tense, arms crossed, jaw locked, demanding answers she could no longer postpone. His eyes, those familiar grounding eyes she had loved for decades, were clouded with confusion, suspicion, and a heartbreak he couldn't yet name. Sharon's hands trembled uncontrollably, her voice barely holding steady as she whispered that she needed him to sit down, because what she was about to reveal would change everything, for all of them. Nick refused. "Just tell me," he said, his voice sharp but breaking underneath. The storm outside cracked like a warning. And then with a sob that tore out of her chest, Sharon finally let the truth spill free. Everything she had hidden, every fear she had swallowed, every lie she had told to protect the people she loved, even when she knew the truth was becoming more dangerous than the secret itself. She admitted that Matt had not stumbled into their lives by coincidence. She revealed that she had known Matt long before he returned to Genoa City, pretending to be the wounded victim of some mysterious criminal ring. She confessed that she had met him months earlier, during a period when she had been secretly looking into a missing person case connected to Ray's old files, trying to fill the void of purpose she felt after losing him. Matt had approached her as a desperate man seeking help, claiming that someone powerful was after him. He had seemed fragile, hunted, terrified, and Sharon, with her therapist's intuition and her mother's instinct to protect lost souls, had taken him in, given him comfort, given him trust. She had believed his story so deeply that she hid their connection from Nick and everyone else, terrified of reopening old wounds about the men she had once tried to save. Tears streamed down her face as she told Nick that Matt had manipulated her, used her compassion as a weapon. Everything she'd done, every meeting, every lie, every moment she pretended not to know him, had been to protect Nick and their family from what she thought was a threat chasing Matt. But she soon learned she had been wrong. Horribly wrong. Matt wasn't being hunted. He was the hunter. And she had helped him walk right into their lives. Nick staggered back, stunned, the betrayal cutting deeper than he could control. Sharon sobbed harder, desperate for him to understand. She told Nick that she had discovered Matt's true identity only 2 days earlier. He wasn't a victim, he wasn't lost, and he certainly wasn't innocent. He had connections to a dangerous underground group linked to the people Ray once investigated. Worse, he had become obsessed with Sharon during the months she counseled him. He twisted her kindness into attachment. He convinced himself that they shared some unspoken destiny. Sharon choked on the memory, admitting she had confronted Matt privately when she learned the truth, begging him to leave town before Nick or anyone else found out what she had unwittingly brought into their lives. But Matt had refused. He told her that he belonged with her, that she was the only person who understood him, and that if she turned against him, he would take down everyone who stood in the way of their future. Sharon trembled as she explained to Nick that she had been living in terror the past 48 hours. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. She tried to gather evidence, tried to figure out how to bring him down without involving Nick, because the thought of putting him in danger paralyzed her. But tonight, she said, her voice breaking, she realized Matt's obsession had reached a point of no return. She had to tell Nick. She had to confess everything. She had to beg for his help. Nick, staring at her with a mix of devastation and fear, finally stepped closer, cupping her shaking shoulders. He asked her the one question he feared. "Sharon, is Matt planning something against you? Against all of us?" Sharon didn't have to answer. The thunderous crash behind them told the truth for her. The front door slammed open with violent force, wind whipping into the room as Matt stepped inside like a shadow made flesh, his eyes wild, dilated, burning with a possessive fury that sent Sharon's heart plunging. Nick instinctively shoved Sharon behind him, but Matt already had the upper hand. He spoke calmly, too calmly, accusing Sharon of betrayal, accusing Nick of poisoning her against him. He claimed she was meant to be with him, that she understood him, that she had promised him a future. Sharon sobbed that none of that was true, begging him to leave before things went too far. But Matt wasn't listening. He had crossed a threshold in his mind where fantasy and reality blended into something lethal. Nick tried to reach for his phone, but Matt saw the movement and lunged, pulling a weapon from inside his jacket. A small cold steel pistol glinting in the storm's reflected light. Sharon screamed Nick's name as Matt aimed it directly at him. For one terrifying moment, Sharon saw the same grief she saw when Cassie died reflected in Nick's eyes, and she couldn't let that happen again. She pushed forward, stepping between the two men, her voice cracking as she pleaded for Matt to stop, reminding him that she once cared about his pain. But this violence, this obsession was not love. It was destruction. Matt trembled, torn between rage and delusion, insisting she didn't mean what she said. But Sharon shook her head, tears pouring down her cheeks, telling him she had never loved him, that her only mistake was believing he wanted help, and that everything she did, from lying to Nick to hiding their connection, was because she was afraid of exactly what he had become now. Nick watched helplessly as Matt's face went slack with heartbreak, then twisted into something monstrous. Sharon begged him one last time to put the gun down. Instead, he lifted it. Nick lunged forward, but the world exploded before he could cross the space. The gunshot ripped through the air, echoing like a death knell through the ranch. Sharon gasped, her body jerking as the bullet struck her before Nick could reach her. She collapsed into Nick's arms, her trembling fingers pressing against the spreading crimson stain on her blouse. Nick screamed her name over and over, his voice raw and breaking as he lowered her gently to the floor. Matt stared in shock at what he'd done, but the deranged part of him whispered that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Nick shouted for help, but Sharon's breaths were already faltering. Her eyes filled with tears and pain found Nick's, and she whispered that she was sorry. Sorry for the secrets, sorry for the danger, sorry for leaving him again. Nick begged her to hold on, promising everything would be okay, but Sharon shook her head slightly, her smile weak, her tears mixing with the storm wind blowing inside. She told him he had always been the love of her life. Always. Her hand slipped from his as the light in her eyes dimmed. Sharon Newman, survivor, mother, fighter, heart of Genoa City, took her last breath in Nick's arms as the storm raged around them. Nick's scream tore through the night, a primal echo of loss that the walls themselves seemed to absorb. Matt, realizing the irreversible finality of what he had done, fled into the storm, his silhouette swallowed by darkness. Nick held Sharon's lifeless body, sobbing into her hair, whispering that she couldn't leave him, that she had to come back, that he needed her. But the room was silent except for the storm and the shattering of a family forever changed. And so the confession Sharon prayed would save the people she loved became the final truth she ever spoke, leaving Nick with grief, fury, and a vow that Matt would pay for everything he had taken from them. Nick had experienced grief before. Grief that hollowed him, grief that broke him, grief that forced him to rebuild from ashes he never asked for. But nothing had ever cut into his soul like the moment he felt Sharon's last breath slip away in his arms. The storm had quieted outside, as if the sky itself collapsed into exhaustion after witnessing the tragedy it had refused to prevent. But inside the ranch, Nick remained frozen in the exact position where his world had ended. His hands were still coated in Sharon's blood, drying in streaks across his fingers like a brand he would carry for the rest of his life. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He couldn't understand how the universe dared to keep spinning when Sharon Newman, his first love, his forever love, the woman whose spirit had pulled him back from darkness more times than he could count, was gone. The paramedics had arrived minutes too late, their rushed voices and urgent footsteps muted by the deafening silence in his mind. He barely heard their pronouncement, barely saw them drape a sheet over her still face, barely felt when Faith fell to her knees beside him, screaming her mother's name, her hands shaking violently as she begged them to bring her back. Noah stood behind her in shock, tears streaming silently down his stunned expression as he tried to hold his sister while she fought against him. Nick saw none of it. His mind had tunnel vision, locked onto Sharon's lifeless hand peeking out from under the sheet, a hand he had held through every chapter of their turbulent but beautiful life, a hand that would never squeeze his again. It took the police physically pulling him away for him to let go of her. And when they tried to walk him outside, he broke, collapsing onto the wet pavement as the reality finally crashed into him. Matt had taken Sharon. Matt had stolen the woman who had survived more heartbreak, more trauma, more battles than any one person should ever endure. And now she was gone, not because of fate or illness or accident, but because of a man Nick should have protected her from. The guilt swallowed him whole. He had seen Matt's instability. He had felt something off. He remembered the way Sharon had flinched when his name came up, the way she forced a smile she didn't mean, the way she avoided questions. Nick had known something was wrong, but he trusted her to tell him when she was ready. And now she would never be ready again. The guilt festered inside his chest like a burning coal. By the time Chance arrived to take his formal statement, Nick was no longer just grieving. He was consumed by a cold, focused fury he had never felt before. Chance approached him cautiously, aware that the man sitting before him was a ticking bomb. Nick's voice was monotone when he explained what happened, but when he described Matt, how he entered the ranch, what he said, how Sharon stepped between them, his voice cracked with rage so sharp it made Chance look away. When he finished, he stared directly into Chance's eyes with a warlike calm. "Find him. If you don't, I will." And they both knew Nick meant it. Meanwhile, Matt was already slipping deeper into the night, his mind fractured, his emotions a tangled mess of fear, fury, and denial. He replayed the gunshot again and again, refusing to accept that he had killed Sharon. He told himself she had only collapsed because she was scared, because Nick had pushed her too hard, because she would wake up and realize she still needed him. But deep in his warped psyche he knew the truth. He had destroyed the only person who made him feel seen. And now he was alone, hunted, and spiraling. He stumbled through the woods outside town, half delirious, clutching the gun as if it were the last anchor to his sanity. Rain soaked his clothes. Mud splattered his jeans. Branches tore at his face, leaving bloody marks he barely felt. His only coherent thought was escape. He had to get away before the Newmans unleashed their wrath. But running didn't silence Sharon's voice in his head. It didn't drown out the sound of Nick screaming her name. It didn't ease the suffocating realization that the future he created in his delusions had died the moment he pulled the trigger. Matt screamed into the night, a sound raw enough to rattle the birds from the trees, before collapsing on the ground, shaking uncontrollably. In Genoa City, the news of Sharon's death ripped through the town like a shockwave. Within an hour, the hospital, the police station, and the Newman Tower were buzzing with whispers, tears, panic, and outrage. Mariah and Tessa rushed to the ranch and broke down the moment they saw the bloodstains on the floor. Summer left a board meeting mid-sentence when she received Noah's call, sprinting to comfort Faith, who was inconsolable. Nikki and Victor arrived shortly after, with Victor rapping, a protective arm around his son, the patriarch's face carved into a grave mask of steel, while Nikki wept openly for the woman she had once clashed with but ultimately grew to love. Even Adam, upon hearing the news, felt something inside him shatter. Despite their complicated past, Sharon had been one of the only people who saw the good in him even when he couldn't. He rushed to Nick's side, offering comfort Nick didn't respond to, but didn't push away either. Chelsea held Connor tighter that night, her own tears slipping silently as she tried to explain why everyone in Genoa City felt broken. And Ray's memory felt painfully heavy in the air, as if the universe had committed a cruel injustice by taking from Sharon the two men who had loved her most fiercely. But no one felt the loss like Nick. He locked himself in the ranch office, refusing to leave, refusing to sleep, refusing to accept help. He sat in Sharon's favorite chair, replaying every moment of their shared life like a film on endless loop. He remembered Cassie's birth, Summer's childhood, their early romance, their reunions, their heartbreaks, their remarriage that never fully healed, their stolen glances, their shared history that tied them together no matter what. Her smile, her laugh, her courage, her kindness. And he cried silent, crushing sobs he had no strength to suppress. When morning came, Chance returned with updates. Matt had been spotted near Highway 17. A stolen car had been discovered abandoned near the edge of the woods. A gas station attendant claimed he saw someone matching Matt's description buying food with shaking hands. Nick stood up with a single sentence. "I'm coming." Chance refused, reminding him this was an active manhunt, and Nick was emotionally compromised. Nick stepped closer, eyes deadened, jaw locked. "If you don't let me help, I will go on my own. You won't find him before I do." The tension was thick enough to cut. Chance, recognizing the wildfire behind Nick's grief, finally relented, but only slightly. He allowed Nick to ride along with Victor's personal security team, strictly observing the command structure. It was a compromise Nick accepted only to keep moving. Meanwhile, Matt's grip on reality deteriorated rapidly as he attempted to flee Genoa City. His body was exhausted, his mind fragmented, and his remorse twisted by paranoia. He convinced himself Nick would torture him. He convinced himself the police would shoot on sight. He convinced himself that his Sharon would want him to survive because she always forgave everyone. He wandered into an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town, shaking violently, replaying his life with her in delusional fantasies. He imagined her telling him she understood why he acted out. He imagined her telling him she still loved him. He imagined her hand brushing his cheek. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw was Nick holding her dead body. The hallucinations tormented him. He screamed at shadows. He punched walls until his knuckles bled. He destroyed the barn interior in a frenzy of guilt and fury. And then he collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering Sharon's name like a broken prayer. Back in Genoa City, Faith clung to Noah as they sat on the couch in the Dark Horse building, surrounded by loved ones who didn't know what to say. She blamed herself for not seeing Sharon's fear sooner. She blamed Nick for not protecting her. She blamed Matt for everything. And her grief turned into anger. Cold, sharp anger that reminded everyone of her mother's fire. She vowed that Matt would pay. Noah, equally devastated, tried to be strong for his sister, but he too felt the crushing weight of regret. He had encouraged Sharon to seek therapy after her recent stress. He had assumed she was improving. He never imagined she was hiding a monster inside her life. As the manhunt intensified, Victor activated every private investigator, every Newman connection, every resource he had. Adam hacked into traffic camera systems to track movement. Chance coordinated checkpoints. Even Billy stepped in to offer support, deeply affected by Sharon's death, and wanting to help for the sake of his children's connections to the Newmans. The entire town united in a single purpose: bring Matt down. Hours stretched into days, and Nick refused to rest. His eyes grew bloodshot, his beard unshaven, his voice ragged, but he stayed focused. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every clue became a fuel source for his fury. By the third day, a breakthrough came. A hunter reported hearing screams in the woods. Not normal screams. Anguished, unhinged screams. The search teams moved instantly. Nick insisted on going with them. Chance hesitated but ultimately allowed it under tight supervision. They reached the barn a little after midnight. The silence was so thick it felt alive. Nick stepped inside first, ignoring every order to stand back. The barn smelled of rotting wood, spilled gasoline, and madness. The walls were slashed with knife marks. Broken bottles littered the ground. Blood smeared the floor. And in the far corner, half-conscious, trembling, and pale as death, Matt lay curled in the dirt, clutching Sharon's scarf against his chest like a stolen relic. Nick froze. His breath caught. The sight of the scarf Sharon wore the night she died, sent a violent tremor through his entire body. Something inside him snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing Matt by the collar before anyone could stop him. He slammed him against the wall, eyes burning with pure, blistering hatred. "You killed her," Nick growled, the words barely human. Matt, delirious, tried to smile. "She's not dead," he whispered. "She's just sleeping. She'll wake up. She loves me." Nick drew back his fist, ready to end him, but Chance and Victor's guards yanked him back with every ounce of strength they had. Nick screamed, fighting like a man possessed, trying desperately to reach the monster who destroyed his life. Matt only stared blankly, whispering Sharon's name, as if stuck in an endless loop. It took 4 officers to restrain Nick. It took a sedative to keep Matt from harming himself. And it took every ounce of emotional strength the town had left to survive the aftermath. For Nick, the war was far from over. Because now came the trial. The questions. The media. The memories. The nightmares. The empty house. The silent phone. The absence of Sharon's voice in the world. And the one question he may never find the strength to answer. How do you keep living after losing the love of your life in your arms? And yet beneath his grief, beneath his rage, beneath his shattered heart, one truth remained. Nick would make sure Sharon's death wasn't in vain. He would see justice through no matter how long it took, no matter how painful it was. Because Sharon deserved peace. She deserved dignity. She deserved the truth. And Nick would carry her memory like armor forever.